Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 36 of Spiritist Conversations, a show where we sit down with friends to talk about the world through a Spiritist lens in an informal, unplugged, and unscripted way. I am Dan Assisi, and I am very excited to be joined by my friends Susana Simões and Flavio Zanetti here today. How are you guys doing?
Hey guys, nice to
Hello,
see
hello.
you again. Hello, everybody.
Hello, Dan, Sue. It's great to be here. Great to see you guys both.
Did you say 36 then?
Episode 36. Yeah.
Wow.
That means we're
Yes.
getting old.
This is also year six. This is the sixth year that we're doing this. So I still have very fond memories. I think it was in Georgia. You guys don't remember this, but I accosted you when I showed up with a microphone and say, what if we just record this conversation? So a
Pretty
lovely
awesome.
journey. Excited to be here with you and kickstart this new year.
Yeah, we our relationship is lasting.
So far, so
So
far, so far.
Don't jinx it.
Also,
no,
very excited that all of us got the memo today somehow and dressed in black. So, this is just kind of how we roll these days. We seem to be in the same wavelength, even though we're in different parts of the country. So, excited to jump in with you guys.
Let's do this.
who do we have with us today?
And our special guest for today's episode is our friend Charles Kemp. Kemp, and he is a researcher, a speaker, and just a friend of Spiritist Conversations. He's joining us directly from France. Welcome back, Charles. Thanks for being on the program again.
Thanks for having me. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Susanna. Thank you, Flavio. Very happy to be here again with you, talking about Kardec, which is a subject I appreciate particularly. So, okay, let's try to transmit some of the details of who he really is, who was really Kardec, and why is he, after more than 1.5 centuries, still so known and more known, by the way, everywhere on this planet right now.
Well said, Charles. Very well said. I think it's a great introduction. But before we begin, I just want to remind folks that Spiritist Conversations is broadcast on multiple channels on the interwebs. So if you want to join our conversation, we would love for you to find your way into our official Spiritist Conversation channels, because the comments you may be putting on different channels don't always make their way back to us. So if you do want to be heard, if you do want to participate, make sure that you come in and just say hello on the chat on YouTube, on Facebook, or whatever it is that you are, because we are really excited to have you here with us. Just a friendly housekeeping there. But okay, so who is this Allan Kardec guy? Who's this guy? Everybody's going to stay quiet today.
It's just hard to know where we start. But I would
Yes, it is.
let me just say that he is the codifier, the man who put together what we call today the Spiritist philosophy. How about that for an opening?
That is wonderful. That is wonderful. And thanks for bringing your dog as well, Sue.
He's
We love
always
him.
around.
He's part of Spiritist Conversations. So you wouldn't be a Spiritist Conversations without him.
Without Sue's
I
dog.
know, I know.
But I'd like to say that Kardec, even though we say Kardec really compiled Spiritism, right? He didn't really invent Spiritism, correct? That was not something that he invented per se. So we cannot say he was the inventor, but rather he was the one that compiled everything he studied and put together in order for us to today consume this that we call Spiritism.
And that in itself, it's a wonderful perspective, right, Flavio? Because I think that's something that sets Spiritism a little bit apart from different ways of looking at life. Generally, you have somebody like, whether it's a philosopher or a religious person who receives some sort of like special knowledge or revelation. And that person then becomes like a prophet, becomes the starter of something. But with Kardec, it didn't exactly happen that way. He didn't really set aside, an intention to say, I'm going to start something new. He was just really looking into things. And as a matter of fact, Allan Kardec is not really even his real name, right? So maybe this is, we kind of punt this to Charles a little bit and say, Charles, as our resident, French / Kardec expert, what can you tell us a little bit about Kardec to start the conversation?
Yeah, so let's go. His true name was Denisard Hippolyte Léon Rivail. He was born in Lyon in 1804. And he grew up, was educated in Switzerland by in Pestalozzi's Educational Institute in Yverdon in Switzerland. And then he had a normal career, I would say, like educator. He had an institution at that time giving for young children and also older children. And he only got aware or started some investigation about spiritualist or spiritist phenomenon when he was 50 years old. So it was in 1855 that he started to investigate. And the first book, the Spirits book, was published the 18th of April 1857, which means something like 165 years ago, a little bit more now. And he dedicated the rest of his life until his discarnation, which was 31st of March 1869. So he dedicated all that time in investigating, going more in depth, writing other books, giving lecture, visiting centers, and so on. So Allan Kardec was only, let's say, the last 11 or 12 years of his life. The first 50 years, he was, normal life in the area of education in Paris, at least until 1840. And then in the 1850, he had a period where he had quite some difficulties also to materially got the necessity to sustain his family. And he found then this new way, this mission started only at the final phase of his life. So as you clearly told it, Flavio, he was not, he always put himself, made very clear that the ideas in the Spirits book, for instance, are the ideas of the spirits who were communicating. He just made the questions, okay? And the answers he transcribed in the Spirits book are the answers which were given by the spirits. So this means that the spiritist body of knowledge came from the spiritual world and were absolutely not his personal ideas. And even on some topics, like for instance, reincarnation, he needed some time to be convinced himself, The idea came very clearly from the spiritual world, and then he ended up accepting it. Why? Because it was presented in a rational, explained, logical way, not just a statement, you must believe or not, no, with all the arguments behind it in order to, yes, this really makes sense, and accepting it then through the understanding of the arguments.
And that's a great point you bring, Charles, because I also think that that's the reason why the spirits also said, no, you don't get to put your name on this, right? This is not, don't use your regular name, because this is not your ideas. This is the spirit's idea. And therefore, we want you to use a name from a previous incarnation that you had, so that it's not confused with whom you are today, because they're doing the heavy lifting. He did have the wonderful chance of organizing those responses in an easy to understand format. But I think right from the beginning, we get this really clear message that is the Spirit's teachings, right? The first work is the Spirit's book. It's not Kardec's book. It's not Rivail's book. It is the
Exactly.
Spirit's book. So it's a really different way and approach of bringing this new body of knowledge forward, right? Saying like the owner of this thing, it's not here in the physical plane. I think that's very different, right? Very unusual.
Exactly.
I have a point and a curiosity that I want to bring and actually see what Charles has to say, and for all of you as well. When it comes to the names, we mentioned here that Allan Kardec was a name that he used in a previous incarnation. And Charles starts by saying his name as Denisard Hippolyte Léon Rivail, but we also find Hippolyte Léon Denisard Rivail written in different places, which can be a little confusing for someone who does not know. I mean, not only two names, but seems like three names. What's the story behind that?
Yes, it's confusing. And the second confusion on top of this is that Hippolyte, there are 5 or 6 different ways to spell it. Huh? So the Denisard Hippolyte Léon Rivail is the one which is shown in his birth register certificate. And that should be the official one. Now we have to understand that it was in 1804. You remember that French Revolution came a little bit after the US Revolution. It was 1789, so it was only 15 years later. And at that time, so before it was ecclesiastics, the registers were held by the church. And after the revolution, of course, they had to be all the infrastructure necessary with the staff also to make the revolution. And that is explaining why at that time the training of those people and so on was maybe not yet so optimal, and that it was, let's say, not so formal. And when we talk about Hippolyte Léon Denisard Rivail, which is the most known one, this is, by the way, the one that himself was using when he was writing or signing a letter or putting his name when he was married, for instance, and so on. He always put Hippolyte Léon Denisard Rivail in this sequence. So it's not only his case that happened. For instance, we have other cases. Alexandre de Lannes, his name was not Alexandre, it was a different name, but he changed and put the name Alexandre, which sometimes gave a little bit confusion because you need to have judgment of a judge saying, no, it is the same person, just to certify the identity. But that was simply, how to say, the status at that time. Nowadays, it's a little bit more rigorous and more complicated. But at that time, it was a little bit more free. And then Allan Kardec, of course, Rivail was quite known in France in the education. He put several contributions for the education system, not only in France, but also in Belgium or other countries. He developed a lot the Pestalozzi method. So he had he was known as an educator. And if he would have signed the Spirit's book with Rivail, one could have said he's using the fact he's known in an area in order to promote something else. So that's one reason why he changed the name. He used a pseudonym, in fact. But he never was hiding himself. Everybody knew that Allan Kardec and Rivail was the same person. And the second reason was also at the beginning, when he published the Spirit's book, he still was working, had to do some jobs in order to sustain his family. And 2 of these jobs were in a Catholic publishing company, Pélago, which was from Lyon and had a succursale in Paris. And the second one, he was working for a newspaper, which was L'Univers, which was also Catholic. So at the end, they knew it, and he lost these jobs, of course, because he published the Spirit's book, but at least it gave him some buffer, a little year, to find some other ways to survive in his life. So that is probably also the second reason why he adopted this pseudonym.
Interesting.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing, right? Because nowadays, a lot of criticism in general in the world is, oh, somebody's trying to make money off of spirituality, right? So how is that guy cashing in on that? But for him, it was quite the opposite, right? Because he actually put a lot of whatever money he had, especially at the end of the life, into this thing. So it wasn't really a financial proposition, right? He ended up spending quite a bit of his money into this thing. Is that right, Charles?
Correct, yes. He was pragmatic, because you can give for free what you receive for free, but publishing a book is not for free. Publishing the Spiritist magazine is not for free. So you have to find a way to finance it. And what we knew is, for instance, so he bought a property, which was Villa Ségur in Paris, which today is worth, only one flat there is worth €1 million, dollar, or whatsoever. And there's something like 50 flats in that area. So you can have an idea of the value of what he had at that time. But that enabled him to make some loans. So he was getting money, something like 25,000 francs on his own risk, giving his property as a guarantee for the loan in order to finance, because at the beginning, only the Spirits book and the Spiritist magazine did not bring the financial equilibrium. And that was always a concern of him in order to make the thing, giving the sustainability to it. But he was clearly, as you told, Dan, putting money from his own pocket into the Spiritism, even when the thing got a little bit better equilibrium, financially speaking.
I think it's important to mention that publishing a book today, while difficult, right, it's not as costly as it was when Kardec was publishing, right, back in 1857. So the amount of money and of course the work required to publish back then was surmountable, right? And if we compare to today, right, so way more difficult back then than it is today.
Yeah, it was quite costly. The typography was letter by letter, line by line, page by page, and then 18 or 36 pages into a big frame, and printing France, verso, and then folding and cutting. So you had to do 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 at once. So it's a little bit like publishing before. Today we have on demand. You can publish one at a good price. But at that time, publishing a book, it was thousands and thousands of French francs, equivalent today to euro. It's a little bit what we knew. I don't know if you remember. The first books edited by the International Spiritist Council, for instance, it was a huge investment. Today, it's of course much easier, but at that when you go only 20 years ago, it was much more difficult. So when you go 160 years ago, it's even more critical. No?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and one of the things I think it's really interesting is because we're all a little bit Kardec today, right, in Spiritism, because we all end up putting our own resources into these things, right? When nobody here gets paid. And Spiritist Conversations, as you can see, is a top-notch professional production, full of really skilled professionals that really do this for a living. Maybe not, but we are happy to freely give that which we freely received. Charles, so one of the things, and for the group here too, one of the things that I think most interesting about Kardec, it's actually not Kardec itself, but how Kardec became Kardec, or why Kardec became Kardec. I mean, how does Rivel become Kardec, right? So how did he get exposed to the whole spiritual piece and decided that he was going to, actually study this? Because I think that in the beginning he was not really excited about all these new phenomena taking place.
Yes, so we are doing quite some researches right now into the mesmerism. Mesmerism,
yeah.
And amongst this movement of mesmerists, there were two trends. One of these trends was spiritualists. So these people were already around 1820, 1830, 1840, totally aware that some person in the somnambulistic state could get some information and even talk with spirits, souls of people which were discarnated. So clearly there were some clear signs and experiments in that way 1, 2, or 3 decades before. And then, of course, we know that 1848 was Hightsville in the US, the turning table, and so on. So Hippolyte Léon de Désarrivaille was studying a little bit the mesmerism. And he was, when he had some questions, for instance, about health, the health system was not what it was today. So when you had a health problem, you went, of course, to a doctor, but also to a somnambulist person in order to receive some hints about what to do to recover your health. So we have some evidences that he was also sometimes asking help from a somnambulist, which was called Mariette, and that was in 1840. So I think since when he arrived in Paris around 1822, 1823, he was interested in this area, mesmerism, but he did not, engage himself personally in more efforts in it, because his task at that moment was pedagogy, was educational system. And when then this turning table came in France around the very beginning, 1850, 1849, it got really developed, but again, he was not involved in it before 1854 when he heard about, and 1855 when he, for the first time, went to the house of Pleine Maison, where he, for the first time, could see a table moving and answering to some questions and so on. And since he was from the Pestalozzi method, trained to observe the phenomenon of nature and so on, he saw immediately that it was authentic, that there was no trick, no lever, no rope or elastic or whatsoever. And he also analyzed immediately that some of the answers which were received are totally out of the capacities and of the knowledge of the persons which were present. So that was then the trigger who made him change. It was not Kardec becoming Kardec, it was Rivail becoming Kardec.
Yeah, but I think it's important to mention, Charles, that the turning tables was a phenomenon back then in France, or all over the world for that matter.
Yes.
People gathered to watch these tables turning in everywhere, right? There were ads on newspapers. Folks
no Netflix at the time, right? Yeah, no HBO, right? No movies,
no social media. Like, this is
no radio.
No, right?
Yeah. And so it was like people. Sorry.
I said, who needs all that when the tables are flying around?
I know. We got to talk about this thing, like this turning table phenomena, right? Because the séances, the salons were like in vogue at that time, right? So if you have never been connected to the history of the turning tables, people would sit around in a room, and sometimes they would put their hands on the table, and the tables would start to move on their own. And of course, there were many calls of like, this is fake and so forth. But in other places, it was not. And so, like, the whole question of whether this is really happening or not was one that was bubbling at the time.
Exactly, yes. But he did not, the particularity of Kardec, he did not stay to the phenomenon itself. He did not really was making it as a joke or whatever. He immediately saw, okay, it's moving. There is no doubt about that. He saw it from his own eyes, repeatedly several times. But then he went more to the, okay, now, so what? The tables are moving. What is moving the table? Who is moving the table? Who is giving the intelligence answers that are coming through the table? And this is really, he went immediately to this next step, looking for the cause, and also looking for all the philosophical, ethical, and so on consequences about it. And that is basically what we have in the Spirits book. So it's really the first book who came not just describing facts, the table moved X time or Y time, or it was not just the facts, he went much further from already in the first book. And that is why today this book is still one of the most sold. The Spirits book or the Mediums book Kardec wrote. The Mediums book is still today the best book about mediumship. Even so, it is more than 160 years old. And that is really, when he saw the table, it then came the connection, because he came on Earth reincarnating already with this mission. But then when the mission started, this connection was made. He got aware, and he decided to fully dedicate himself quite quickly to investigate deeper this phenomenon and all the consequences of it. And that is why Kardec is really made these 5 books plus the Spiritist magazine plus the smallest booklet in a really comprehensive way that has, Chico Xavier made more quantity of books and so on. But how to say, everything was already bound and still today recognized. There is no one today who came and said, look, this and that is not consistent. Here there is a contradiction or an inconsistency into what Kardec said. And we know how much science has evolved in the meantime. But science did never demonstrate that any fundamental point that came through the spirits is wrong. The spirit body of knowledge, or in paradigm, is still solid today. Nothing has been demonstrating has been false in it, and that is really remarkable.
Yeah. It really is, and I want to double click on what you said there, Charles, because I think it's incredible, right? So what we have this phenomena taking place in Paris. Tables are moving. People are beginning to ask questions of the tables, right, and the objects that are moving, and the tables begin to answer these questions by way of like, go to the left if it's a yes, go to the right if it's a no. And later they get a little bit fancier and say, knock once for A, knock twice for B, which probably took a very long time to get an answer, right? But obviously the point is, and this is where I like one of Kardec's phrases that really stuck with me when I first studied Spiritism is, for every effect, there is a cause. And every intelligent effect requires an intelligent cause. So if the answers to these questions that are being asked of a table are intelligent, if the table quote, I'm doing air quotes, right? Air quotes here. If the table is able to answer intelligent questions, and we know that a table does not have a brain, so clearly somebody is behind this. So what does that mean? And when we begin to realize that, oh, hold on a second, the consciousness of the departed, so to speak, which we call spirits, are actually answering these questions. I think that's the genius of Kardec. So tell us about the spirit world. What does it mean to be discarnate or without a body, right? And from there, we have this unpacking of these wonderful books that you are talking about, these 5 books we call the codification, that changed everything, right? And that's amazing, because that's a different way of thinking. Instead of just enjoying, sorry, Siri's trying to talk to me here on my phone all of a sudden. I don't know if you could hear her. But the interesting thing is, while everybody was looking for a little bit of fun and just kind of trying to figure out what was happening, he was diving a little bit deeper and trying to understand the consequences of this communication piece.
Let me get kind of where you stopped there, Dan, and just kind of check with Charles. I mean, some of the details of this beginning, like Dan was talking about, that he went and he started observing and he started to investigate. And I think I read somewhere that at some point he was interested, but even, because he was such a busy man and he had other things, he was, not yet 100% into it until he received 50 notebooks of communications, and he was asked to organize those 50 notebooks. Is this something that we have more information about? Is this something that is, it just seemed to me, the time that I read, that was actually relevant and changed a little bit of the nature of the meetings at the time, from just places where people would go for fun, to like really giving the meetings a different purpose.
Yeah, so the source for these 15 notebooks with questions and answers does not come from Kardec himself.
Okay.
What comes from Kardec himself is what has been compiled by Pierre Gaëtan Lemarie in the posthumous works, which were published only in 1889, so 20 years after his death.
Years after.
It was 100 years of the French Revolution and so on and so on. But what is sure, what Kardec is confirming, is that he was going to several groups, because there were some 10 or 20 groups in Paris. And since he really took the thing seriously, the groups where the people were just looking to the phenomenon more seriously, he took over somehow naturally the control of the meetings, because he came with the questions already prepared, and he really managed the agenda of all the meetings. Of course, some other group were continuing for curiosity, for fun, or whatsoever, and those groups he left a little bit aside. But then he was known into these other groups, and then for sure, this person from the groups, they had some notes, or what was it, 50 or not, we don't know. They when they saw that he was compiling and doing deep investigations, they for sure gave him all the material they gathered even before he joined in 1855. So, but that it was 50 notebooks, this does not come from Kardec himself. So it's an information that we have to take as let's say, more generically. It is possible that the first biograph, like Henri Sauce, he was knowing several persons were still alive that did know Kardec very well when he was alive. And it was maybe some verbal transmitted information. But we got a lot of documents recently, since 2018, something like 2,000 or 3,000 documents. But unfortunately, we did not get these notebooks. They are still missing a lot of information. And let's see if one day we get to them. So, but for sure, he took a natural leadership because of the seriousness and also all the engagement he brought into these sessions.
I wanted to bring something, because oftentimes we talk about Kardec, and obviously Kardec is the compiler of Spiritism, as we know, but there were a lot of people behind the scenes also helping him, namely, right, Amélie Gabrielle Boudet, which was his wife, right? And not much is talked about her. So, Charles, do you have anything that's interesting to share with us here for the folks that are either watching or listening to us live or afterwards, more on his wife, his great partner, that really motivated him to continue, right, for the Spiritist magazine and the books and all those things?
Yes, so it really also they came, she incarnated something like 8 to 9 years before him, so she was a little bit older than him, and they married in 1832, so Kardec was 28 years, and she was already 36 years old when they married. But of course, it was a fit from the beginning. We found the first letter he wrote to her.
Wow.
After their first meeting. So it is an information that is now available in French and in Portuguese, and I think also, if not yet, soon in Spanish, into a website which is called Projeto Kardec, from the Federal University in Brazil of city of Juiz de Fora. And it's really very well done. When you go there, you can find this letter, you can see the original, you can see the transcriptions and the translations, hopefully also one day in English. And there, when you read what he writes to her, and the second letter also, we don't have her answer, unfortunately, but we have the first letter he sent to her and the second letter he sent to her, and a letter also sent by the mother of Kardec to Amélie. You see that there was a perfect fit since the beginning. And we can see from all the difficulties they passed as Rivail and then also as Kardec, they were also always extremely bound. So Amélie sometimes putting some pressure on him, but always behind in order to help. And she was also fully sharing these studies and giving their opinion. And we can see from the multiple letters we found now between them as Rivail and also later as Kardec. Because when he was traveling in 1862, for instance, there is where we got all the letters. And from this, we can deduce all what she was doing when they were together. So,
and as
she
a
was
public
really-
service announcement, Charles, we should just say for the younger people listening to us, the letters are paper text messages written on paper that people used to send to each other back in the day. Just want to level set here for a younger crowd.
Yeah.
Okay, it's they say the ancestor of the email.
Yes.
Or of the post,
Yes.
no? Yeah. Yes, and so clearly they had this very complementary relationship. And there is a discourse which was done by Gabriel Delanne. Gabriel Delanne, he knew Kardec because he was born in 1857. So I think only 1 month before the Spirit's book. And so Amélie survived Kardec. He died in 1869. She died in 1883. So she continued the work and really did all what she can in order to pursue, give continuation to the work of Spiritism and Kardec. And when Gabriel Delanne is commenting, making a speech at the funeral of Amélie, there is really how you can see an appreciation giving from someone who knew them, who saw them together during a good time.
It's a great thing that he had such an incredible and close partner, especially given the difficulties and the challenges that he faced in his life. I think that's something that's kind of worth talking about. I mean, we did mention money, we play about the money, but he was accused of many different things, even making money out of spiritism, amongst many other things. So having that person next to him was certainly comforting, given the level of struggles that he encountered doing his work.
Yes, exactly.
Great
Because
points too. And Charles, I'm going to piggyback on Susanna's here because at some point it looks like Rivail, right, actually has some fame as an educator. He had a couple of books published, I think, in French grammar that was used throughout the country. So his professional life, he was actually, later on very well established and somewhat known. So it's interesting that he kind of worked backwards, right? He actually was known in his professional life, and at the beginning not known in the spiritual piece, and then he kind of both of them kind of went forward. But it must have been really hard to have those comments that are not always nice, right? That I think everybody that goes through some sort of spiritual transformation has to endure the criticism of people.
So we went in the archive in Paris and went a little bit more looking about this financial situation of Rivail. And really what we find out is they always had financial difficulties as Rivail. It was quite difficult for them. This big institute, which was working Rue de Sèvres in Paris, had to close because his mother was discarnated already. She discarnated in 1832, just after the marriage. The father disappeared when he was 3 years old in 1807. So he was sustaining also his mother and his uncle. And the uncle was gambling in the casinos here and there, lost a lot of money, and that was he was obliged to sell his institute to another guy in order to pay the debt and whatsoever. So just for you to see, the money he got for buying the Villa Ségur was from the inheritance of the father and the mother of Amélie. And there they got something like, I don't know, 10 or 20,000 or 30,000 francs, which was not so much. That enabled him to buy this property for 10,000 francs. All this we found now. We have the papers, we have, we found all this showing that, and at the end, this Villa Ségur that he bought gave him the solidity in order to enable banking, the first step of the codification from his own pocket. And the reality was this. And this we have now all the evidences about this.
And I also read, Charles, that Villa Ségur was going to be something that he left afterwards for he wanted to build a community for Spiritists who
Yes.
did not have retirement and so that they didn't become destitutes or homeless, basically, right?
Exactly. So all the belongings of Kardec went to Amélie, of course, when he died. And all the belonging of Amélie went to the Society for the Continuation of the Works of Allan Kardec. So all what they had, because they did not have children inheritors, so they gave everything for the development of the Spiritists even after their death. So the problem is that, I have to say, at that time it was not so easy, and some distant parent from Amélie came and made a trial and got the money back, which made the bankruptcy of that society at the end, already at the end of the 19th century. Sorry.
Yeah.
So
But,
we
you know,
also have the evidences about this now.
Uh-huh.
For those who are reading
Fascinating, yeah.
Portuguese, you can find a lot of information in a book which was published recently from Carlos Sete Bastos. We are currently translating into French.
Yeah.
And here you find a lot of information, not only about these cases which happened after Kardec, but also about who were these Pleine Maison, Mr. Baudin, Mr. Carlotti, and so on. So a lot of researches have been made. Now we know exactly who these persons were at that time. All these
And I think
mediums
that
participated.
I think that's wonderful and very in line with Spiritist teachings, right? At the end of the day, the resources, financial resources, physical resources don't really matter as much. But he did leave us with an incredible legacy, right, of knowledge that he helped organize. And I want to go back a little bit to that, Charles, because we know that Rivel, started to do the research and he went to different groups. And I want to go back to that really quickly because I think it has a lot to do with Spiritism. So Kardec then comes up with these questions, and he's basically going around to different groups asking these questions and sometimes repeating them in different groups just to try them out, right?
Yes,
It's in a very scientifically minded mindset of saying, I'm going to ask this here in this group, I'm going to ask this again on that group and see how the answers jive or if they don't jive. And from there, I'm going to start figuring out whether they are really true or not. Can you talk to us a little bit about these experiences that he had?
Yes, so he saw immediately that all the spirits which are communicating are not always right. Okay, you can, as in the humanity, since the spirits are just the humans after the death. Some, even with the best goodwill, will say you something which is completely false. Okay, so he saw that immediately that the answers from the spirit were not always consistent between themselves. So there are two criteria he used to overcome these difficulties. The first criteria is to analyze everything with our intelligence, common sense, reasoning, what makes sense, what is consistent, what is not consistent. So the analysis of us human that he was doing at that moment. And the second criteria he made was what he called the universality of the teaching of the spirits. So the more you get spontaneously from different sources, different medium, different countries even, second edition of the Spirits book, he got already a lot of feedback from Europe and even Americas and wherever, consolidating then the teachings themselves, because if you are one group with one medium, and you don't have this universal control. And that was a criteria he applied from the beginning in order to reach this solidity, this consistency of the teachings.
So I love the way you say this, Charles, because I mean Kardec is like a genius, right? In my understanding, right? Because he was able to get thousands and thousands of messages,
Yes.
to put them together, to compare them, to build on them, and to really select or filter those that really made sense, that were talking about the same things from different mediums that do not know each other, right?
Yes.
However, the point I want to make is, even though today people still, right, when we talk about, oh, we should study Kardec, we should know more about Kardec, right? Oh, it's too difficult, it's too complicated, I'm just going to read something else, I'm just going to go somewhere else, right? So what's the importance of, for those folks that perhaps may be listening to us that are not spiritists, right? What's the importance for us to start from the beginning? Can you maybe talk a little bit about that?
To be frank with you, Flavio, I think that this methodology and this rigorous way that Kardec was working, I did not see it a lot of times repeated since that time. There were, of course, some very important, like Herculanopides, like even Gabriel Delanne, Léon Denis, some strong followers, of course, but they, with all the respect I have for them, they did not reach the level of Kardec. He really reincarnated with, how to say,
big brains.
The hardware,
a big brain. That's what it is.
He was programmed to do these works, trained into several past lives and so on. So it's really for this. You see, we talk about Delanne, we talk about Denis, we talk about Herculanopides, even Chico Xavier, whoever. But Kardec is really making the how to say, is unanimously recognized within the Spiritist movement, and it is not by chance. It's really because he had these skills, these faculties. He set up this methodology. When you look some professors of epistemology or scientific methodology, they are really amazed, because a lot of the principles he used in 1857 for the Spirits book got only conceptualized later on, even in the 20th century. And he was clearly anticipating 50 years ahead, more than 50 years ahead, some principles which got, let's say, consolidated into the science of the science only much later. And of course, it was himself, his qualities, but also the help of the spirits which were assisting him. So it was really something amazing who happened at that time. And again, I repeat, science today, none of the basic principle of Spiritism has been demonstrated as being false by the science after 160 years. So it's really amazing to see how something like this can happen.
100%.
It is. And that's a great point. I often say that the Spirits book and that kind of thinking was a idea ahead of its time, but not before its time, right?
Yes.
Because it came at the right time of our history, where we were being mindful and being thoughtful about scientific method and, replicability and how to do something that's very coherent. And that's just a fascinating and incredible piece, this whole legacy of Kardec that goes well beyond just the books. We have a guy who's incredibly well prepared as an educator, well-rounded scientist in general, who had a fantastic support from his wife, who's no slouch either, right? Amélie was also quite brilliant herself, who was able to gather a number of folks to look credibly and skeptically into these phenomena that were taking place, and come up with this body of knowledge that we now call Spiritism, that started with the Spirits book officially in 1857. And that's really incredible. And we could talk about this for many hours, but I know that we're reaching to the end of the time. But I wanted to call us out here and say, as we begin to wrap up, what is one thing that really stuck with you about Kardec and this whole beginning of Spiritism that you think is still very impactful in today's world? And we can kind of do a whip around and have everybody kind of chime in here. But does anybody want to lean in and just kind of share with us what they think is it's really noteworthy and is a good takeaway for us to kind of keep in mind?
Susanna, go ahead, please.
I'll go. I think I just want to say that, like you said, then we could probably spend like 8 hours here live if we want to really go deep into a life that is so incredibly rich. I think I just kept thinking, whoever is listening to us, will that person get that taste of how special, how unique this man is and his mission. And so what I'm always considering in my mind is every time we bring a new idea or concepts that are challenging, we face hard opposition. It's part of the process of evolution. New ideas will face a lot of struggles. He had enemies. We see some of the dialogues in books like What is Spiritism, very intelligent people questioning the teachings. So he was a brilliant mind and a man who really dealt with a number of obstacles, who he was prepared up to 50 years old to develop all the resources to undertake the task. But nevertheless, he was told, and indeed was a huge task that called for a huge man, not only in terms of intelligence, but in terms of relating and dealing with kindness and with humbleness, not only with his fans, but especially with his enemies, giving them the respect. And he was well known for knowing how to dialogue and how to navigate this world, which is, with all the disparities, with all the contradictions, with all the questioning, which is something that we today struggle so much to do. So I think that he was pretty huge, has my incredible admiration, especially when it comes to that, someone who's launching something that really revolutionized the world with the understanding of life, what life is, and all the implications that comes with the revelation that came to the spirits.
Yeah, I thank you, Susanna. This is great. This is brilliant. What I'd like to add is while it's really important for us to continue studying Kardec, we're going to spend a whole life studying the works of this amazing individual. But I want to say that while Spiritism started with Kardec, it did not end with Kardec. I think this is an important point. He gave us all the tools, all the resources to kick off this new thing that we call body of knowledge, this new philosophy, this new idea, this transformational concept that changes our lives. And luckily, other authors, other folks are coming at the tail end to contribute, to corroborate what he said, and to add additional ideas, right? I think it's important for us to mention that. Obviously, right, we're going to stick with the foundation which Kardec brought us, but as a house is being built, right, the foundation, then you can build the house on top of it, right? How tall or how wide you build the house will be up to us, right, to go after, to study, to get knowledge, and really gain more through other authors as well.
And before we go to Charles for some final comments here too, and we're really grateful that you're with us here today, Charles. Thanks for being here. I just want to highlight that as well. I think that what's really amazing about Kardec's work and his legacy is that Spiritism is really not about the content. It's really about the method, right? Because this method of inquiry, this method of asking questions, of looking to the outside world and try to make sense of things and learning for ourselves and checking different sources, it's something that keeps on giving. If we were to lose all those books that Kardec published today, but retain his mindset, we could get all of them back, right? And I think that's the one powerful message that sticks with me, that Spiritism does to us and that has done to my life, is ask these questions, try and see if there's this universal control, if this truth shows up in different places, and then bring it back to us and say, how will I behave differently now that I know that I'm an immortal spirit? How does that change my behavior? How does that change my day to day? So I absolutely love the example that Kardec gave us, and I'm still very much in awe at his ability to communicate some topics that are so complex, so clearly and so simply, which is typically, the mark of a great educator. So that's really just really nice of him. So thanks for sharing things with us, Charles. So tell us, Charles, what is one big takeaway after all your research about Kardec that it still strikes you as something incredible?
Yeah, so I thank you for the statements. I fully share what Suzanne, Flavio, and you, Dan, just said. It's true. What could I add? I think when we look a little bit what Kardec has done, he came at the right time, when after the French Revolution, amongst others, where there was some liberty of expression, also a little bit more independence towards the official religions, and also some other scientists like Descartes, like Auguste Comte with the positivism, developing the methodology of science itself. And what did Kardec do in all that ambient? He was seeing turning tables, very simple phenomenon. And he saw immediately that there is something extremely deep behind. And he had the lucidity, because science and religion were fighting once against the other. What did Kardec? Still are today. Right?
Yeah.
He took the science and thought, okay, what is good in science? The methodology, the investigation, experiments, and so on. But then he removed a lot of things which in science are not so good, like atheism, materialism, or sometimes a little bit pride, change resistance, as Suzanne well taught. He also looked at the religions. Okay, what is good in the religion? At the beginning of the gospel, he explains this very clearly. Is the moral teachings of love one another, do unto the other what you would like to do unto you. All these moral laws, which are universal, that you can find in any religion in the world. But then he removed also what is not so good in the religion, like the hierarchical sacerdoty, hierarchy, the exclusivism, my religion is the best, and out of my religion there is no salvation, all these things, all the dogmas, rituals, all these things, he shifted away. And by taking the best of the two which were enemies, he thought something out of the box and made something new, a new concept, which is called Spiritism. And that is why, until today, even the scientists studying this type of subject, they have difficulties to categorize Spiritism. Even within the Spiritist movement, these people are telling you Spiritism is a science. No, it's a religion. No, it's a philosophy. It's not a religion in the sense of the dogmas, exclusivism, and so on. It's not a science in the sense of pride, materialism, and atheism. It is also not a philosophy for the type of philosophy which are negative or even influenced also by materialism. It is simply something new out of this box. It is really a disruption this modern wording that we are using today, that he brought 150 years ago, and that is still not yet today fully understood, neither by science nor by the spiritists themselves. Sometimes did not understand that. And that was really something brilliant. And I like what you said, Dan. Spiritism came before its time, but at its time. And the evidence of it, what is it? When you look in France, the Spirits book still sell. You have 10 different publishers, and it's selling several thousands of exemplars still today. I go sometimes and put, we have this book box in the street. I don't know if you have the same in US. I put the Spirits book there. I come the next day, it's not there anymore. I put again, and still 150 years ago, you have so many people looking, and we put it also for free in electronically, reading, trying to understand this revolutionary concept that he brought. And that is not for, it's really the thing which I think we still need a little bit of time to understand this fully.
Absolutely. Charles, before we close and I pass it back to Dan, I just want to acknowledge the work that you were doing. I know with other folks, the research work on Kardec's life, it's much appreciated. So our gratitude, because it's precious and it's priceless. So I just want to make sure that I say that to you, and just wonder if people want to get in touch with you or they want to know a little bit more about that research or what's going on currently. What is the best way to find out?
I think one good is the website I just mentioned, Progetto Kardec at the University of Juiz de Fora. In French, the French Spiritist movement, we also organized since more than 20 years now what we call the Encyclopédie Spirit, Spiritist Encyclopedia. So we put all the information we have available into this encyclopedia. Of course, there are some books. So we wrote a new biography in French. We contributed a lot to this new and quite some extensive biographies in Portuguese, because to bring the more complete information, because now with the digitalization of the archives, with all these thousands of original documents we found, we are really also changing. It's a quantum jump into the information and the primary sources we got from Kardec. And of course, all this is done completely. The rights of this book is going only to the institution, which is Cultural Center Eduardo Carvalho Monteiro. I don't know if someone of you knew Eduardo Carvalho Monteiro. I was so happy to meet him in Paris in 2004 when we had the Congress. And this ideal of making these researchers, putting it available for free to everyone who is interested in, is what we are still continuing and seeking. And I thank you, Suzanne, for your appreciation, and a lot of people getting also the same feedback, admiring the work we are doing in a total disinterested way.
That's awesome.
Yep. So thank you, Charles. Thank you, Flavio. Thank you, Susanna, for being here. It's great to be in this journey with you for our 6th year together. I just want to thank everybody who is watching or listening as well to Spiritist Conversations, which is a production of the Spiritist Institute. If you enjoy today's conversation, please share that with a friend. He helps us get the word out, and folks find some great content that we think is being produced here. And to revisit past episodes, you can go to YouTube, you can go to Facebook. You can also subscribe at your favorite podcast platform and not miss one single episode. We are thrilled to be here with you today, and we look forward to seeing you in our next conversation in a couple of weeks, where we're going to talk about healing in Spiritist passes. So thanks for being here, and have a great night, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. Thanks.